very good. I think some of my colleagues did mention that they are going to ask questions, so I will confine myself to 4 or 5.
Shall I start off?
Yes.
Can I start?
Introduce yourself.
Muhammad Ali, Chair of Tax Analysis Centre. Just a question around the 10p tax and the mansion tax itself. It is something what the Liberal Democrats were really keen on and started it off. Now we're hearing from the Labour Party itself that they want to get closer to this and really want to support this. Yeah? Is this a way what we're finding towards the next government? Working as partners or something different?
No, I don't think so. It's they're copying our good ideas, basically. I mean, they were in power for 13 years, they never did anything. And now they're, you know, I mean, I was the person working with Nick Clegg who developed this mansion tax 4 years ago. And it was something we campaigned on. I don't know whether you're aware of the idea, but it's basically that it's not a factor in Sheffield, but in London, you have people buying up houses, 10 million, 50 million houses, right? Many of them actually come in from outside and don't live here. Vast amounts of wealth, they're hardly paying any taxes on them, they're just paying £1,000 a year to council tax. And it means that there's vast inequalities of wealth, and the upper end of the property market is just escalating out of control, so people who live here can't get in the market. So it's a fair thing to do. It would raise quite a lot of money that we could use to cut other taxes or to improve the services. And the Labour Party have seen that it's a popular idea, so they're trying to copy it. The one thing that we've done in the government, which not too many people are aware of, is that we've used as much money as we could to lift low earners out of tax altogether. So if you're a low-paid worker, you don't pay income tax, and we've done that every year, and we're getting towards 10,000 a year. I mean, there are, you know, quite a lot of people in the city who are in that category. So, you know, particularly pays students working part-time, people in low-paid occupation. They're now paying quite a lot less income tax, and that's very much our policy. But, you know, it's because it's popular, the other parties then copy it.
Mr. Nazir.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammed Nazir and a partner in law firm called Vasco Brown Solicitors in Sheffield. My question is, there's a lot of new startup businesses, and at the same time, at the same pace, a lot of businesses are closing down, but there is no real help from the banks. What our government is doing, and what are your suggestions on this? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was what I was trying to say, that the banks are not helping. I mean, one of the problems which we haven't seen yet, and you will see when the economy starts to recover, is that we have a problem of zombie companies. Have you come across this idea? Yeah. There's a lot of companies that should have gone bankrupt because they're not viable, but they're being kept going artificially because we've had this crisis. And when the economy recovers, those companies are going to be let go. So you're going to have a lot of bad news stories. But in terms of getting startups and expanding businesses, keeping them properly financed, one of the things we've introduced recently is something called funding for lending, so that the government has access to low interest rate finance, and we want to try to channel some of that money into business, so it isn't just used to finance government debt. The problem with it is what we're discovering is that much of that money is going into the mortgage market. It's not going straight to companies. And I'm going to see the governor of the central bank and his deputy to try and see if we can tweak that system and make sure it works much better for companies, for SMEs. We have got guarantee schemes. You know, if banks say to you, okay, we don't think you've got enough security, enough collateral, the government will step in and provide the guarantees. We've got our own government venture capital schemes, for example, to put equity into companies. There's a whole lot of schemes we're operating to try to get over this problem of the banks being very, very reluctant to lend. But as I say, you know, if people have had a heart attack, then they don't rush out the next day and behave normally, and that's what's happened to the banks.
I think what the bank is doing over there is basically saying, yes, we will agree, but it's our computer which is not accepting your application, which I do read quite often. But
They do
anyway,
make excuses.
okay, they do make excuses.
Next question.
Maruf.
My name is Mohammed Maroof. I'm a chartered surveyor and consultant in regeneration and development. And I think a lot of the stuff that you've already talked about as well. But there's three things that are hurting the construction industry. One is finance, obviously. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about finance being available, but when you actually go to the banks themselves, they're very reluctant to lend for property development. That's commercial or residential. Secondly, the planning process, which I know has been relaxed a little bit, but if you actually do go and apply for planning, it still seems to come up against the same obstacles. Thirdly, there is a huge demand for housing in the city. This city is, I think there's about 90,000 people on the waiting list for housing, statutory housing. That's across the board. There are people who want to do development, and I've first-hand experience of many, many people who want to do this, but they're coming up against this blockage. And clearly, there is a dual role here. There's local authority are holding on to land, and central government is holding on to land as well. And I know there's been directives that have been sent out by central government that land should be released, but actually happening on the ground is still being caught by Section 123. So what's your
106.
106 is the planning, Section 123
sorry.
is the Local Government Act for best consideration. What's your views on this?
Well, there's a mixture of things. I mean, you're quite right. The construction industry is on its knees. It's in a worse position than any other industry. And that's for several reasons, one of which is that the housing boom burst. So, you know, we had this massive, it's less of a problem, I think, in Sheffield than some other cities, but certainly in the south of England you had this ridiculous boom. Banks lent far too much and the bubble burst. Commercial property went down. There was a lot of, I mean, a bank like the Bank of Scotland went bust.
If I did will be Shafiq and then you will be.
And this guy was now on trial for fraud and was in charge of all that. So you had a, you know, the whole bubble burst and it caused great damage to commercial and residential property markets, and that it and
I
construction.
think they're going completely the opposite way. They're becoming completely risk averse
Yeah,
now.
no, they've gone to the other extreme. But the government, you know, the last government, as much as this government, has in a way added to the problem, because in trying to make economies, the government has stopped capital investment, and that in turn has hit the construction industry. One of the things the Lib Dems have been trying to do in government is trying to push the Tories to be a bit more adventurous with, you know, getting out infrastructure projects. And one of the things we want to do is to give councils more freedom to borrow in the markets to build council houses. That would be one way of getting construction going. So that's one set of answers. Secondly, you're right about the banks. They won't lend on property. And you can, in a way you can understand it, because they don't want their fingers burned with another boom fizzling out and being left with losses. So they're understandably cautious. About planning, you were very fair, and you acknowledge that we are trying to make it easier to develop. The Section 106 rules have been modified. They're not quite as onerous, and people who are stuck with development land and Section 106 obligation have been relieved on them, so they can get ahead and build houses. As you say, there are some agencies that are holding on to land that they shouldn't. They should be selling it for development, and some government departments are actually doing quite well in getting rid of land. The old regional development agencies like Yorkshire Forward were sitting on lots of property, and that's now been put back into the market. So sites are becoming available. We're trying to forget that there are enough sites now with planning permission to build about 500,000 homes. And some of the developers are actually sitting on the land. They're just waiting for the price to go up and speculating. So it's not entirely because of lack of availability of land. Some councils are not helpful. I don't know what it's like in Sheffield, but some councils they should be helping developers to build property, and they're not. As a result of the changes we've been made, when developers go to appeal, they are winning now about 80% of appeals against councils. But I know that takes money, it takes time, it's not straightforward. But yeah, we're on the case, but it is a bit of a mess.